I'm Nick Zeppos, Chancellor of Vanderbilt University. Welcome to the Zeppos Report, a podcast where I talk with the people shaping and helping us understand our world. My guest today is scholar and author Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. Michael is visiting Vanderbilt today to deliver the keynote address for our annual Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Commemoration. Michael is a university professor of sociology at Georgetown University. There he's made his mark doing work across every conceivable discipline, every conceivable classical and modern format, and really enlightening us on the world, our nation, and African-American cultural analysis. Michael is known by many as a hip-hop public intellectual, and not many people also know that became an ordained minister at age 19. He has authored and edited numerous books, and his most recent work is entitled Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America. He's joining me today to discuss his latest book and to reflect upon the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. on this significant day of remembrance and reflection. Michael, welcome to the Zeppos Report.
Chancellor, it's always great to see you, my friend, and it's an honor to be here.
Yeah, I feel like it's a kind of a reunion for us. So, age 19, I think back when I was 19, I don't know what I was called to. You were called to the ministry.
Yes,
and
sir.
Tell me about that first step in the journey.
Well, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. I was 9 years old when Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered in Memphis. The year before that, a dirty trail of smoke creased the horizon, and I inquired of my mother, "What is that?" And she told me it was a dirty pig. A dirty pig had caused an urban rebellion. Right, dirty pig? What is that? Blind pig is what they call them, actually. After-hours joint. I didn't know what that meant. So I'm in Detroit with the urban rebellion / riots / revolution. Then the next year, Martin Luther King Jr. is murdered. I had no idea who he was. I had never heard his name. And when I saw him on television, it instantly attracted me to him and to the use of words to move people. Because of that last speech he gave. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight, we as a people will get to the promised land. I was like, my God, who is that? And I went out and, the next day sent out with my little allowance money for a little 45 record of the recordings of Martin Luther King Jr., excerpts from them. Wow. And it was a conversion experience in a very fundamental way. And that drew me to understanding oratory as an art. And then later, when my pastor came to my church at 12 years old, Dr. Frederick Sampson, now dead, God bless his soul, but a remarkable man, a man who knew Shakespeare by heart. Much of the poetry of the English language was not foreign to him, and he had committed much of it to memory, and was an intellectual of the highest order. And that gave me a sense that you could be a minister and you could be really smart and you could do scholarly things. So, that and Martin Luther King Jr. and other factors drew me to the ministry. At 19, I acknowledged my call. At 21, I was licensed, and then shortly after that ordained. So for the last 38 some odd years, I've been part of the ministry. And it was that calling, that sense of duty and responsibility to not only God as I perceived God to be, but to one's community. How can I best serve the people who have loved and nurtured me? How can I best repay the effort of investment by showing that I'm serious about what I do and what I am and what I say? And feeling a connection to my minister, Dr. Sampson, gave me an idea of the path I could take, and that set me on the way. And as a result of that, I, acknowledged my call and began to minister. I've pastored 3 different churches along the way, but my ministry has mostly been intellectual engagement as a professor and so on.
Well, tell me, you use so, wonderfully kind of your mentor and art and word and using those skills. How have you been so able, when you think of Reverend Sampson, and then to write this path-breaking book on between God and gangster rap.
Yeah.
What was that spiritual, artistic, intellectual journey like?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was called to the ministry and I began to think about my life in those cloistered and some would say sanctified walls, I felt something was missing, however. I felt that as important a duty as that is, it had to interact with the broader universe of thought and feeling and emotion, both in terms of the activism that was there in the communities in which I was nurtured. My father was an automobile factory worker. He worked in the Kelsey Hayes Wheel Brake and Drum Company. I called it my alma mater, my father's alma mater, because I worked there for a while myself in a factory.
Wow.
So, and he was a master setup man. I was doing, arc welding and so on, and then unloading train trucks. The reason I have a bad back now is that I was unloading 50-pound wheel brake drums in a day. So it let me know with the political world afoot there. A lot of things are going on, police brutality. A program in Detroit called Stress, Stop the Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets, was afoot. A lot of black men dying unjustly at the hands of police. So the political world had to have some kind of interconnection with the religious world, more than I saw. And then secondly, popular culture, what people listen to, the songs they listen to, the movies they look at. How can they be interpreted within a framework of both faith, of serious intellectual reflection about what's going on between the community, pop culture, and the life of the mind. So all that stuff was interesting to me, and I said, I got to blaze a different path. I got to figure out a way to join all of my interests. I love The Godfather as a film. I love listening to R&B music and Marvin Gaye, and I also was deeply connected to social justice movements. Even early on, I began to speak in public at the age of 11. I wrote a speech at 11, won a contest at 12, the oratorical contest for the Optimist Club. So I wanted to find a way to bring all of that stuff together, and I began to write and think about popular culture early on. And as a second-year graduate student, I published my first professional piece. There was a magazine then called Christianity in Crisis. It's no longer there. Rhino Niebuhr and others wrote for it. And I wrote my first piece, Rap, Race, and Religion. I was a second-year graduate student at Princeton, and I began to write professionally then. That allowed me to bring together all of my interests under one umbrella and allowed me to think about pop culture, about God, about religion, and about the world of social justice at the same time.
Well, I find the newest book, Tears We Cannot Stop, it's structured as a sermon. And I'm not a minister yet. As I see the world, I see the university, I see the nation, it's who is preaching, who's preaching. And so, and you say that these are moral and spiritual passions that can lead us to a better day in our union. And I'm maybe just a narrow lawyer, and I've taught constitutional law and all these things, and my students over the years would say, what's the most important part? Is it the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment? And I finally, kind of about 12 years ago, I said, well, it's those three words, we the people, in a more perfect union. So, how do we, lead to the better day in our nation and that, beloved community, that more perfect union?
Yes.
And then how in a more pluralistic America, and I don't mean to suggest that there wasn't the kind of pluralism, but yet how does that carry through in this very pluralistic society that we have now?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the geniuses of the founding fathers, as it were, was the fact that disestablishment clause was pretty big.
Yeah.
That in order for one religion to be dominant, none must be.
Yeah.
Enshrined in public space, given the imprimatur of the state. This is not England. This is not the Church of America. And that genius, even though a lot of people, as you know, mistakenly call this a Christian nation, South Africa is an officially Christian nation. How do you like that?
Yeah.
So It's not a Christian nation. And the Christianity practiced by, as you know, Thomas Jefferson, it was radically dissimilar to what an evangelical pietist would practice now.
Yeah.
The first thing Jefferson did was get rid of the miracles. Anything that can't be empirically verified, boom, it's got to be gone. Oh, there's all your water to wine stuff right there.
Yeah.
So, we say these things, we bandy these terms about, but, what's more important is not whether or not we agree theologically, or even if we have the same religion. What I've discovered at this age in my life is my religion is love. Yeah. And I don't mean that sappy, sentimental stuff. Dr. King used to make those distinctions between agape and eros and philia. And so agape is that self-affirming, other-validating love, that love that says we are about community. And even in our pluralistic society, this is especially critical now. As I try to make an argument in that book, justice is what love sounds like when it speaks in public. So if my religion is love, I've got to be concerned about gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, trans people. I've got to be concerned about, Mexicans who are being demonized by a chief executive officer of the United States of America. I'd be concerned about Muslim brothers and sisters who are victims of Islamophobia and the like, and on and on. If we are serious about this country, we can't practice isolationist politics or xenophobia. We've got to have a sense of what holds us together. And America, as Martin Luther King Jr. insisted that we remembered, is still an experiment. Yeah. And it's a radically provocative and profound experiment. And it's an experiment that we have to constantly hold in serious examination, however. James Baldwin, early in his life, said, "I love America more than any nation on earth, therefore I reserve the right to criticize her perpetually." Yeah. And there's no such thing as us as a nation getting better without us being able to be critical. It doesn't mean we don't love this nation. There's a difference between nationalism and patriotism. Patriotism says, I love my country, and I want to make sure it does the right thing. And when it's wrong, I got to speak out and say it. Nationalism says, I'm in a meeting with the president, and I don't really recall whether or not he said X, Y, and Z. So nationalism is an uncritical celebration of the nation to the exclusion of the virtue and value of self-critique. So my thing is, if we're living in a pluralistic nation, what gets us there, the spiritual core of this nation, is the openness to others. And we can't get in the door and then slam it on somebody else. The first wave of immigrants gets in and then hates the other immigrants that come in. Then the other immigrants get in and then they don't like the other people coming. We got them from Eastern Europe. Then we got them from Western Europe. Then we closed the door. Then we got them, we kept the Chinese out. Then we kept the Japanese out. Then we opened up in 1965 and we said, hey, let's let a whole range of nations of color come in these doors. And it transformed this nation. That's our strength. So when I think about pluralism, I think without that plurality of voices that comes together, it's a chorus of voices. Are they conflicting? To be sure. Are they sometimes contradictory? To be sure. But this is the beauty that de Tocqueville understood, that Gunnar Myrdal understood, that this is a nation best seen as a patchwork of diversities that agree, that have consensus about the fact that we will try as a nation to provide space and opportunity for those who would like to reinforce the virtues of this society and our national culture. And so far, with some vicious exceptions and some horrible mistakes we've made, that experiment continues to inspire people to want to keep coming to America. And we have to have that kind of openness in order to embrace them and embrace the best in us.
Let me turn to a New York Times piece that you wrote on the topic of race in sports. Mm-hmm. And it features a quote by Dr. King about the importance of black athletes integrating the baseball diamond in the 50s. Right. And we recently announced the new Center for Sports and Society at Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. We just had a wonderful event at the museum in Washington, D.C., where we showed a film on the crossing the color line in the SEC, which happened at Vanderbilt from someone we lost recently, Perry Wallace. Mm-hmm. And why does sports, to you, both, I'm watching the Vikings, yesterday, and it's like, people are hugging, and it's...
Man, they're crying. They got holiness.
And they're crying, and they're
talking
just,
about Jesus. They're talking about God.
Yeah,
they're doing holy dances.
Yeah, and I see that, and then I see how it can just rip the country apart.
Yes.
And so what is your view on the role of sports as a kind of mirror of the division,
right,
the struggle, but yet maybe a community of people?
Yeah. Well, you named it brilliantly by evoking that image of Mr. Diggs after he scored that touchdown, the improbability of it, the miraculous character of it. This is a reflection of the nation, a fledgling group of people against the tyranny of a nation that would impose taxes without fair representation, that would impose such hardship upon their lives that they would seek to form a nation anew and to strike out in new territory, so to speak. So that's reflected in sports rituals. They reinforce for us and replay the very struggle to become who we are as a nation. That's why you and I and other people in this country, we don't have to know each other's religion, what our zip codes are, what our academic backgrounds are, or even how much money we make. Did you see that? You don't even motherfuckers have to finish. Yeah, I did. I mean, how amazing was that? So it's a unifying theme. It's a unifying language that allows us to articulate our American identity. This is something we all saw, that we all can cheer on, even if we're on the opposite team. We see the extraordinary effort put forth. We see the result of discipline. And we see on that playing field, regardless of what your religion is or your money, because the guy making the play might make $600,000 a year. The guy throwing the ball might make $3 million. But the point is, they're a team, and they pull their own weight. And without doing it together, they won't individually be successful. So that's a reflection of who we are as a nation. Now, on the other hand, there are telling differences, so that we also see in that same sport, when we have extra athletic concerns, when predominantly white owners, even if they don't do it officially, collude or have a cabal of owners whose mindset, you don't have to have a conspiracy when the real thing is operating effectively. They don't have to have collusion when many of the mindsets of those owners is, we don't like a guy who doesn't stand for the flag. And despite time after time and athlete after athlete saying that's not what it's about. And it's not against this president. It started under Obama. So it didn't even start under Donald Trump. It's not against the flag. But this is where your understanding is. They're saying, many of the players, starting with Colin Kaepernick, we're doing this because a lot of people are unjustly hurt by the police and sometimes murdered. We want to protest that. So during the playing of the national anthem, as you know, it's a compromise. When Colin Kaepernick discovered that a veteran said, hey, that's disrespectful for you to sit. Why don't you just kneel as a show of reverence? That's what we do. And even that is misinterpreted. And then the irony, of course, is that many Americans say, well, why don't you do it a different way? Why don't you, the moment you say do it a different way, you've lost the efficacy, because the efficacy is in making us a bit uncomfortable, like Dr. King did, to draw attention to something that's wrong. The moment that the concern is not whether Kaepernick can win a game for me, whether he can throw the ball of sufficient distance with an arc on that spiral that allows a player to catch it and therefore cross the goal line, the end zone. That's the concern that should be primary, but it's not. There are extra athletic considerations. So sports reveals to us what's going on. The quote from Dr. King told Don Newcomb, who played after Jackie Robinson, you will never understand how you made a substitute argument for me. You made it easier to do what I did, because when people liked you or Larry Doby or Jackie Robinson, they said, well, maybe we'll give black people a chance because these guys are good and they're not what they say they are in terms of stereotypes. So they were ambassadors, and sports can do that. It can both bring us together, and unfortunately at the same time it is a mirror, and it can rip us apart in a serious way.
Let me turn to another topic, and you've taught it a number of universities. You currently found your home at Georgetown. Obviously, there, here, nationally, internationally, you're, starting these really difficult conversations, but I think with a guidepost of love and commonality, and as we as human beings, is there a project, or even our nation has this project? Universities clearly have their own reckoning to do. And you're at Georgetown. And how has the community come together to reckon with the sale of slaves?
Yes, right.
And then what can we learn from the importance of that truthfulness and maybe reconciliation,
Yeah.
but not until you say, this is what we did.
That's right. No, it's an extremely important point you raise. And I think to the credit of Jack DeGioia, President John DeGioia, and I'm sure you are all colleagues, remarkable man, and a man fit perfectly for the job of grappling with the present consequence of historical decisions, the contemporary consequences and manifestation of outcomes that draw from a history that we have failed to confront. Gore Vidal said, we live in the United States of amnesia. And I add, well, Barbra Streisand has supplied the theme song. I'm glad I don't have to explain to you who she is. I can tell young people who the heck she is. Maybe now, Miss Kaddish, who was in the Runaway film that was a hit, who made Barbra Streisand hip again among a younger generation. But Barbra Streisand sang those words, what's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget. So we don't want to remember. We try to forget our way into things. And to the credit of Jack DeGioia and many of the other members of our community, we said, no, we got to face up to this. This is what happened. 272 human beings, including some children, were sold for the benefit, economically and financially, of an institution that has now reaped millions, if not billions of dollars over the years of advantage. How do you acknowledge that? How do you deal with that? How do you address that? What do you do that's righteous and the right thing to do? And we're just beginning down that path. There are a lot more things we have to do. Now we're giving equal consideration in terms to those to the people who are the descendants of the 272. But people want to go further, like, you're going to let them in like they were, people whose parents are gone here or athletes are gone here, and some kind of acknowledgement.
Or bumped off an airline flight. There's something bigger at stake here.
Something bigger, like, well, what about, let's also, if we're going to be righteous about it, and we reaped economic benefits, do we pay for a scholarship for them? Do we just admit them? Can we support them from some of the money that was reaped by, as an advantage and benefit from the sale of their ancestors? So we're grappling with that. And it's an ongoing process, and thank God I'm at a school and an institution where I can proudly say, we did some horrible stuff, but we're really trying to get it right, and we're trying to fix it.
Well, Michael, thank you for joining me and for presenting thoughtful, critical musings about history, culture, the book of the gospel.
Thank you, my friend. It's always
the
good
Bible.
To hang out. Oh, man.
Dr. King.
Yes, sir.
And racial justice and justice and love in our community. It's really an honor to have you here at Vanderbilt.
Thank you, sir.
You can download this report and other episodes of the Zeppos Report at vu.edu/Zeppos-report. vu.edu/Zeppos-report. Mike's great having you here.
Thanks a lot.